The Krelltak learned the hard way why humans are considered too dangerous to fight. The insectoid aliens watched in shock as the human warriors tore through their battalions, painting the battlefield red with Krelltak blood and gore. These relentless humans refused to give up, even as plasma bolts seared through their armor and flames consumed the ground around them. The human mercenary Michael Jones sat at a dimly lit bar on the Prilorian space station Zephyrus. He downed a shot of potent alien liquor, the kind that killed lesser men. The other patrons, a mix of fearsome aliens, gave him space. They knew his reputation. Michael could snap necks and crush skulls with brutal efficiency. The battle-hardened Prilorian warrior Corvus walked up to Michael's table. He had a job. The Prilorians were losing a war against the Krelltak. Countless Prilorian soldiers had died screaming as the Krelltak butchered them with advanced weapons. Corvus needed skilled killers. He offered Michael a hefty sum. Michael took the job. He craved the thrill of combat and wanted the credits. But Corvus warned him. The Krelltak terrified the hardiest Prilorian veteran. They slaughtered without mercy. Michael spat on the floor dismissively. He didn't fear the Krelltak or death itself. Let them come. He boarded Corvus's ship, eager to bathe in the blood of his insectoid foes. After all, if the humans failed, the Krelltak would rampage unchecked, burning planets and rendering entire species extinct. This was a job for the most dangerous warriors in the galaxy, the humans. The Krelltak would soon learn to fear mankind. The ship hummed as it sliced through the void of space. Michael sat in the co-pilot's chair, watching distant stars streak by. Corvus punched commands into the console. The Krelltak, they fight as one, Michael. A hive mind. Michael cracked his knuckles. Makes it easier, cut off the head, the body dies. If only. Corvus pulled up a schematic on the view screen. It showed an insectoid ship, sleek and menacing. See this? Cloaking tech. Damn things are invisible until they ram a plasma torpedo up your ass. The mercenary chuckled. Sounds like my kind of fight. The ship shuddered as it hit the atmosphere of Xandar Prime. Orange flames licked the hull. Moments later, they touched down at a sprawling military complex. Towering plasma cannons and fortified bunkers dotted the landscape. Corvus led Michael down the cargo ramp. A welcoming party waited, a dozen Prilorian soldiers in black armor. At their head stood a grizzled alien with a patch over one eye. Scars crisscrossed his stony face. The general, Michael guessed. You brought a human? The general spat the word like an insult. Corvus stepped forward. General Thrakus, this is Michael Jones. He's the best merc in the quadrant. Thrakus looked Michael up and down, sneering. I've heard stories about your kind, unpredictable, volatile. We need warriors, not mad dogs. Michael met the general's gaze. He had stared down warlords and crime bosses. He wouldn't be cowed by this alien. I get the job done. Point me to the Krelltak. I'll paint the walls with their blood. Such arrogance. Thrakus turned to Corvus. Fine, but he's your responsibility. Get him armed and ready. An hour later, Michael stood in the base's armory. He hefted a plasma rifle, feeling its weight. His fingers danced over the controls. Targeting system, variable power output, it had it all. He slipped into a suit of nano-armor. The material flowed like liquid before hardening into a second skin. Suddenly alarms screamed through the base. Red lights flashed. Soldiers rushed by, grabbing weapons. Corvus burst into the room, face grim. The Krelltak, they're attacking a nearby colony. The fleet's mobilizing. A savage grin split Michael's face. Perfect, I'm going. Thrakus stormed in. Absolutely not, I won't risk... This is what you hired me for, Michael cut in. I'm the best chance those colonists have. The general ground his teeth. Corvus, you're responsible for him. He jabbed a finger at Michael. Get our people out alive, merc. Minutes later, Michael and Corvus sprinted across the tarmac. They leaped into a waiting dropship, joining a squad of elite Prilorian pilots. The ship roared into the sky, racing to meet the enemy. Michael checked his rifle one last time. This was it. Time to show these bugs what a human could do. He smiled. The Krelltak had no idea what was coming for them. The dropship shuddered as it punched through Xandar Prime's atmosphere. Michael gripped his plasma rifle, adrenaline already surging through his veins. Corvus sat across from him, stone-faced, as the rest of the squad checked their gear. The pilot's voice crackled over the comm. "Approaching the colony now, it's a massacre!" Michael leaned forward, peering out the viewport. His blood ran cold. The colony lay in ruins, buildings smouldering and streets choked with rubble. But it was the Kreltak ships that drew his eye. Dozens of them, sleek and deadly, hung in the sky like a swarm of locusts. They were so numerous they seemed to blot out the very sun. "Engaging cloaking device," the pilot reported. "With any luck, they won't—" A plasma torpedo slammed into the dropship's hull, sending it careening. Alarms blared as the pilot fought for control. "We're hit! Cloaks down! Shields at 20%! Corvus swore in a language Michael didn't recognize. "Take us in hot. We'll jump and provide covering fire for the ground teams." The dropship screamed towards the surface, anti-aircraft fire filling the sky around them. At the last second, the pilot pulled up, and the squad leaped from the open bay doors. Michael hit the ground hard, rolling to absorb the impact. Plasma bolts sizzled overhead as he took cover behind a ruined wall. All around him the battle raged. Prilorian soldiers clashed with Kreltak drones, the air thick with the stench of ozone and charred flesh. Corvus took up position beside Michael, his rifle spitting blue fire. "We need to take out those fighters," Corvus shouted over the din, "or there won't be a colony left to save." Michael nodded, a feral grin spreading across his face. "I've got an idea! Cover me!" He sprinted from cover, zigzagging to avoid the plasma bolts that chewed up the ground at his heels. He leaped over a pile of rubble and into a shattered building. There, in the corner, lay a Prilorian hoverbike, still intact. Michael swung himself into the saddle and fired up the engine. It roared to life, lifting him off the ground. He gunned the throttle and shot out of the building, streaking towards the nearest Kreltak fighter. The insectoid ship whirled to face him, its cannons glowing with deadly energy. But Michael was faster. He swerved at the last second, the plasma bolts sizzling past his head. Then he was above the fighter, balanced precariously on the hoverbike. He leaped, abandoning the bike and landing on the fighter's carapace with a clang. The Kreltak pilot, visible through the cockpit canopy, chittered in alarm. Its mandibles worked furiously at the controls, trying to shake the human off. But Michael held on, his nanogloves finding purchase on the smooth metal. He raised his rifle and fired point-blank into the cockpit. The plasma bolts pierced the canopy, and the pilot exploded in a spray of ichor. The fighter, now pilotless, spiraled out of control. Michael rode it down, leaping clear at the last moment as it crashed into another Kreltak ship. Both vessels erupted in a ball of plasma fire. Michael hit the ground hard, the air driven from his lungs. He lay there for a moment, gasping, as Corvus ran to his side. "Oh, crazy bastard," the Prilorian laughed, helping Michael to his feet. "You actually took one down." But their celebration was cut short by a deafening roar. A shadow fell over the battlefield as a colossal ship decloaked above them. It was easily 10 times the size of the other Kreltak vessels, bristling with weapons. "The mothership," Corvus whispered, his face going slack with fear. The mothership opened fire, a storm of plasma torpedoes raining down on the Prilorian fleet. Ships exploded left and right, torn apart by the onslaught. The few that survived scattered, desperately trying to evade the deadly barrage. Michael watched the carnage, his mind racing. They couldn't fight that thing head-on. It was too big, too powerful. But every ship had a weakness. They just needed to find it. His gaze fell on a glowing node on the mothership's underbelly, seemingly less armored than the rest of the hull. An idea began to form, a desperate, reckless gambit. "Corvus, you see that node? I bet that's a weak point. If we could hit it with everything we've got—" The Prilorian shook his head. "We'd never get close enough. That thing's defenses are too strong." "Not if we had a distraction." Michael's eyes gleamed with a mad light. "I'll take my fighter, draw its fire. You and the others hit it with every antimatter warhead you've got left." "That's suicide," Corvus protested. You'll never make it out alive. Maybe not, but it's the only chance we've got. Michael keyed his comm, hailing General Thrakus. He quickly outlined his plan, ignoring the General's spluttered objections. Absolutely not. I won't allow you to throw your life away on some mad scheme. With respect, sir, Michael cut in. We're out of options. It's this or we all die. There was a long pause, then finally a sigh. Corvus, is he right? Is this our only shot? I'm afraid so, General. Another pause, Gears, then you have a go. Gods help us all. Michael nodded, already sprinting towards his fighter. He leaped into the cockpit, the canopy sealing around him. Corvus's voice crackled over the comm. Michael, good luck, give 'em hell. The human grinned, a fierce, feral expression. Time to show these bugs what a human can do. He punched the throttle, the fighter's afterburners roaring to life. The ship leaped forward, hurtling towards the looming mothership. Immediately, the behemoth's point defense cannons swiveled to track him, spitting streams of plasma. Michael juked and jinked, his reflexes stretched to their limits as he wove through the deadly web. Alarms blared as his shields took hit after hit, the indicators flashing red. But he was closing in, the massive ship filling his view screen. The defense cannons were focused entirely on him now, leaving the node exposed. Corvus now! He yelled into the calm. A heartbeat later, a volley of antimatter warheads streaked past him, glowing with the light of captive suns. They struck the node dead center, the resulting explosion blinding in its intensity. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, inexorably, secondary explosions began to blossom across the mothership's hull, chaining together in a catastrophic cascade. The colossal vessel shuddered, then began to break apart, massive chunks of hull spinning away into the void. Michael let out a whoop of exultation as he pulled his fighter into a sharp climb, racing to outrun the expanding debris field. He had done it. Against all odds, they had brought down the mothership. But the battle was far from over. The remaining Kreltak ships, leaderless and disorganized, still posed a deadly threat, and Michael knew that this was only the beginning. The Kreltak would be back, seeking revenge for this defeat. But for now, as he soared through the stars, the taste of victory was sweet on his tongue. The Prilorians had won the day, thanks in no small part to one mad, brilliant, utterly fearless human. They would sing songs of this battle, Michael thought with a grin. And maybe, just maybe, the galaxy would start to see humans in a new light. Not as weak pacifists, but as the most dangerous warriors of all. The Kreltak mothership erupted in a blinding flash of plasma and shrapnel. Fireballs blossomed along its hull as internal explosions tore it apart from the inside out. The behemoth craft split into massive fragments that spun off into the void. Across the battlefield, the remaining Kreltak fighters suddenly faltered. They swerved erratically, their coordination gone. Without the guiding will of the mothership, the hive mind had collapsed into chaos. Corvus whooped over the comm channel. The bugs have lost the plot. All ships engage at will. Wipe them out. The Prilorian fleet pounced on their disorganized foes with a vengeance. Plasma cannons flared. Missiles streaked through space. One by one, the Kreltak ships vanished in plumes of fire and debris. It was a slaughter. But Michael wasn't joining in the redoubled assault. Warnings flashed across his cockpit displays in urgent red. Armor integrity critical. Engines failing. Life support offline. His fighter had taken a severe beating during his attack run, and now the damage was catching up to it. He wrestled with the controls, trying to keep the crippled ship steady. But it was a losing battle. The fighter started to yaw and tumble, caught in the planet's gravity well. Michael, Corvus's voice crackled over the comm, tight with worry. Your ship is in bad shape. We're coming to tow you out. Negative, Michael grunted, stabbing at his unresponsive console. She's coming apart at the seams. I'm punching out. He reached for the eject lever, bracing himself. The canopy blew off with a hiss of escaping atmosphere, and then the rockets fired, catapulting him clear of the doomed fighter. For a sickening instant he was in freefall, the battle raging around him. Then his escape pod enveloped him, thrusters automatically orienting it towards the planet below. But he wasn't safe yet. A trio of Krelltak fighters, acting on their last programmed orders, broke off from the melee and dove after him, plasma cannons blazing. Michael swore, juking the pod's meager thrusters. The Krelltak's parting shots hammered his small craft, alarms blaring as systems failed. The pod began to spin, its stabilizers fried. The ground was rushing up to meet him at an alarming rate. He caught a glimpse of dense forest, a carpet of green stretching to the horizon. With a bone-jarring crunch, the pod slammed into the trees, ploughing a fiery furrow through the undergrowth, before finally coming to rest in a tangle of shattered trunks and torn earth. For a long moment, Michael just lay there, his head ringing. Every part of his body hurt. He tasted blood. Slowly, painfully, he levered himself up and hit the release for the pod's hatch. It cracked open with a tortured groan, letting in the scents of smoke and crushed vegetation. He unfolded himself from the wreckage, nano-armor sparking and tattered. He staggered a few steps and then sank to his knees, exhaustion and injury taking their toll. He looked up, trying to spot any sign of the battle still raging overhead, but the dense canopy blocked his view. He was alone, stranded deep in hostile territory, battered and bleeding, but he was alive, and he'd be damned if he'd let this planet or the Krelltak claim his bones. With a grunt of effort, he pushed himself back to his feet. He salvaged what he could from the pod: a few days' worth of rations, a basic med kit, an emergency beacon, its casing cracked but functional. He set out into the forest, one halting step at a time. He'd survived the crash. Now he just had to survive long enough for Corvus and the Prilorians to find him. Simple enough. After all, he'd faced worse odds before. But as the days turned to weeks, hope began to dwindle. The forest seemed to stretch on forever, an endless expanse of twilit green. His rations ran low, then out. The medkit was soon exhausted, its meager supplies no match for his accumulating injuries. He pushed on, driven by sheer stubbornness, but his strength was fading. The forest, once merely foreboding, now seemed openly malevolent. Strange sounds echoed through the trees, setting his nerves on edge. Glimpses of movement at the corner of his eye, there and gone when he turned to look. Was he still alone out here, or had the Krelltak survived the crash as well, stalking him through the shadowed undergrowth? The uncertainty gnawed at him, paranoia seeping into his exhausted mind. He began to set traps, crude snares woven from vines and salvaged bits of tech, more to ease his own growing unease than out of any real hope of catching game. But sometimes in the morning he'd find them sprung, strange viscous fluids staining the loam. He told himself it was just the local wildlife. He almost believed it. As the weeks stretched into months, even his iron will began to fray. The ceaseless green, the oppressive humidity, the chittering sounds in the night. It wore on him, eroding his grip on reality. He took to talking to himself just to hear a human voice. He recited scraps of old songs, bits of poetry, fragments of memory, anything to keep the silence at bay. His nano-armor, once a marvel of Prilorian engineering, hung on him in tatters. He patched it as best he could with scavenged bits of his escape pod, with resin from the local flora, with chitinous plates harvested from the things that sometimes tried to creep into his makeshift camps in the night. The result was a patchwork monstrosity, a far cry from its former sleek lethality. But it kept him alive. Through the long, lonely months, through the cloying heat and the chittering dark, it kept him alive. Even as his mind frayed and his memories blurred, his body endured. Until one day a familiar voice pierced the green twilight. Corvus, his features etched with disbelief and a desperate hope. He'd found him. Against all odds, he'd found him. But Michael, his once sharp gaze now feverish and wild, didn't lower his battered rifle, didn't loosen his finger on the trigger, because in that moment, looking at his friend, all he could see was another hallucination, another cruel trick of this never-ending nightmare. Corvus took a cautious step forward, hands raised, his voice a soothing murmur. But Michael's aim never wavered, the rifle an extension of his will, the last solid thing in a world gone mad. And in that tense, breathless moment, something in Corvus's eyes shifted. A realization, bleak and heavy, because the man before him, this feral, haunted thing wearing his friend's face, that wasn't Michael anymore. Not really. The forest had changed him, broken him down and remade him, honed him into something lethal and wild, something no longer entirely human. And that something, if left unchecked, could shatter the fragile peace they'd bought with so much blood. Corvus's hand drifted to his holster, a lifetime of hard choices weighing on his soul. He drew in a shuddering breath, meeting those fever-bright eyes one last time. Then in a single heart-wrenching instant, he made the call, for his people, for the friend he'd known, for the man Michael had once been. The shot rang out, startling birds from the trees. In the sudden silence that followed, a single thought hung in the air, unspoken but deafening. No victory comes without cost, and some scars once earned can never be shed. In the wake of the fateful shot, silence fell over the Praelorian High Command. General Thraccus sat heavily, his face a mask of grief and exhaustion. The other officers shifted uneasily, the weight of Corvus's report hanging in the air. "He was a hero," Corvus said, his voice rough with emotion. "He saved us all, but the cost, He trailed off, unable to find the words. Thraccus nodded slowly. "We've always known the risks of working with humans. Their strength, their tenacity, it's what makes them such formidable allies. But it's also what makes them dangerous." He stood, pacing the room. "We cannot let this happen again. The stability of our society, the safety of our people, it must come first." The decision was made. A decree went out. No longer would the Praelorians employ human mercenaries. It was a matter of security, of preventing further tragedies. The announcement sent ripples through the galaxy. Other species, inspired by tales of Michael's prowess, had begun to court human warriors. Now they too were forced to reconsider. Debates raged in the halls of power and on the holonet. Some argued that humans were too valuable to cast aside. Their adaptability, their indomitable spirit, these were qualities that could turn the tide of any war. Others pointed to Michael's fate as a warning. If even the most skilled, most loyal human could be broken by the horrors of battle, was the risk worth it? Amidst the furor, a new revelation emerged. Declassified records buried deep in the Praelorian archives told a different story of Michael's final days. He had not simply survived in that alien forest, he had thrived. The records showed a trail of destroyed Kreltak encampments, of shattered enemy machines. Michael, alone and wounded, had waged a one-man war, hunting down the remaining invaders with a savage efficiency. And Corvus, in that final, fateful confrontation, had not ended his friend's life. The truth was more painful. He had looked into Michael's eyes, seen the feral gleam, and understood. Michael could never return to the man he once was. The war, the forest, had changed him irrevocably. So Corvus had made the hardest choice of all. He had lowered his weapon, turned his back, and walked away, leaving Michael to his chosen fate. The Praelorian leadership, upon learning the truth, chose to bury it once more. Let Michael's legend grow, they decided. Let him stand as a symbol of human courage, of the unbreakable bond between allies. The galaxy need never know the darker truth. And so the story spread of Michael Jones, the human who had single-handedly turned the tide of war. It became a cautionary tale, whispered in the halls of power, a reminder of the terrible price of victory. But in the depths of an alien forest, a different story played out. A lone figure clad in scavenged armor moved through the shadows. He was a guardian, a silent protector, keeping an endless vigil against the horrors that lurked in the dark places of the universe. For he knew better than anyone the true cost of war, and he would bear that burden, that solemn duty, for as long as he drew breath, not for glory, not for fame, but because it was, in the end, the only choice he could make. choice of a human, unbroken and unbowed even in the face of the unspeakable. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.